Welcome to the Proteus Space Export Control Fundamental Annual Training. As originally presented by AEGIS Kelly Koppel on June 23rd, 2025. This is a general overview of export controls, understanding terminology, how to recognize issues, spot red flags, how not to get your team in trouble with the U.S. government, definitions, and classifications. Here is the Aegis team. It includes Jack, Bailey, and Kelly. They specialize in supporting space companies, giving them access to regulations and breaking through barriers. Aegis helps from incorporation through launch. Kelly's specialty is export controls and export compliance. Aegis also is working with Proteus Space on the Trade Compliance Manual for all to have answers, direction, and explanation of what Proteus Space's program is and where to go for help and how to get answers. A little overview of where we're going today. We'll start with why this matters and why we're here. A little background helps to give this context. We'll talk about exports. What's the definition? What exactly are controlled items, and how do I know something is controlled? If they do need a license, what does that look like? How do I go about getting that license from the government? What are controlled activities? Who can I do business with? Who can I not do business with? What are prohibited persons and countries? People on the restricted parties list. We'll touch upon briefly remote travel work and best practices. Same with visitor procedures. We'll work with this more in depth as we look at the trade compliance program. Since Proteus Space is now in Suite 450, we'll get that all set up with the right procedures and processes. Record keeping will be quick. Then we'll talk about violations at the end, and that is our roadmap. So let's start with why are there export controls and why should this matter to you? Proteus Space makes very cool things and very cool processes. Foreign, good or bad actors want to get their hands on what we're making and find out how we're making it. The US government says, okay, before you send this cool stuff over to any kind of foreign parties, anyone outside the United States, we're going to make it a requirement for you to share with us what you're sending, what it's being used for, who you're sending it to. Then we'll give you authorization. And sometimes that authorization is, okay, go ahead and send it. Sometimes there's some kind of parameters. So you have to really look at what your export license looks like. And that's the basis as to why we have export rules and regulations. To really make sure that our technology does not get into the hands of bad actors and is not in contradiction to our national security policies with all the things going on in the world. And we definitely don't want to be penalized in any form or fashion. As we go through the presentation, think about ways your specific job has a role in compliance, whether you're in sales, engineering, export, or etc. At some point, your job description is going to touch upon export controls. You'll need to know what that looks like and how to handle it. And moving on to our agenda item number 2, exports. So let's talk about what exports actually are. How is it defined? What do they look like? These 5 definitions are in the regulations. The first one is going to be really familiar to most of you. It's a shipment or a transmission out of the United States. We'll talk about what shipment means and what transmission means. In general, it's what you think of anything going out of the United States. The second one is called deemed export. If you're in the United States and you're sharing technical data with anyone who is a foreign person, even if they're on U.S. soil, that's going to be a deemed export because you are deemed to have shared that information with whatever nation that foreign person is associated with. The third is transferred ownership control over a satellite. The fourth one you probably won't see, releasing a defense article to a foreign embassy in the United States. Same idea as deemed export. Even though we're in the United States, you're sharing with a foreign person. The fifth definition we'll touch upon a little bit, performing a defense service for a foreign person. Our understanding is that Proteus Space is not doing this, but we want to let you know what the definition is in case you find yourself coming in touch with this. We mentioned U.S. persons. We mentioned foreign persons. This just defines who we're talking about. A U.S. person is anyone who is in the United States and is a citizen, a U.S. national, permanent legal resident, green card holder, some refugees. It can also be any entity organized in the United States or generally U.S. government bodies. So, when we say U.S. persons, we're covering all of these definitions here. When we say foreign persons, it's anyone who's not on here. Okay, let's talk about what exporting looks like. That first definition of a physical movement of shipment outside the United States, it can be a ship, car, truck, train, rail, hand carry. All of these ways is how you bring physical shipment out of the United States. Notice the visual of the ship, the truck, and the hand carry. Because now when you get a transmission, we're talking about electronic or physical transfer of information. That information can be technology, it can be software, it can be released orally by email, upload to a cloud, just accessing from a foreign location from a cloud, or talking to a person. The second definition, deemed export, releasing or otherwise transferring controlled information to a foreign person while we're in the United States. So here's a little picture. We've got an orange person here. We're in the United States. See the US flag. We're in the office. We're talking about controlled information. We've got something on our whiteboard. We've got hardware on the floor. In walks in a European customer. Now that they're here, they can see what we're working on. They can hear us on what we're talking about. They can visually inspect our hardware on the floor. This is just a depiction, just one example of how you're in the United States and you can have a deemed export. This European customer can be any kind of supplier, any foreign visitor, maybe a cleaning crew. Maybe you have a shredding service and there's a foreign worker that you've not been aware of before. These are all kinds of ways. It's really important to think as you're in the office, as you're hiring third parties, as you're working with customers, who's going to be around? Who do I need to vet? Who is a U.S. person or not? What do I need to do to protect things and my controlled information? We're going to talk about visitor procedures later, which will cut down on these types of visitors just seeing things that they shouldn't see, and ways that you can protect your workstation. Okay, now I shared with you what is an export. Let's look at what's not an export. I'm hoping that it's a little easier once you see it. There are some things in the regulation from the US government that tells us you are not an exporter. Launching into space is not an export, so you don't have to worry about that. Anything between US persons, if you're in or out of the United States. If you're in the same foreign country and you're talking to another US person, that's okay. That's not going to be a release. Basic marketing information. If you're at a trade show or you're just trying to sell what you're making, what you have, any kind of basic marketing information is going to be fine. That's not an export. Basic mathematical principles, scientific ideas taught in school, that's okay. Generally, anything in the public domain. That's stuff you've seen in libraries and magazines. There's one caveat. Talking about ITAR and EAR, because the definitions are the same about what's not an export, except when comes to publishing on the internet. ITAR says just because you're trying to release something on the internet doesn't mean that it's no longer controlled. It's going to be an expert and it's going to be regulated. It's going to be an export and it's going to be regulated. EAR treats it a little different. If it's published on the internet, you can decontrol it. Whenever you're working on that, that's fine. That's a business decision beyond what the regulation says. You're probably not going to want to publish what you're working on the internet and decontrol it, but there are a little bit of caveats there for ITAR and EAR. Then we talked about sending and transferring data. There's one piece of the regulation that says that you can do, and it's not going to be considered an export if all the factors are met. If it's unclassified, if it's encrypted, the recipient is authorized, i.e., a US citizen or someone else who has an export license, as long as it's not stored in certain prohibited countries. So now let's take a more practical application look at what we're looking at here. You might recognize this picture. It's the M1 satellite. This is a picture of this is a picture of export control. We don't know yet. What can we do with it? What can we not do with it? The picture. The first thing we need to do is when do we have to classify it? You have to classify it before you export it. Remember, all those 5 definitions of exporting, you have to do all of those. But also, we have to classify before we deliver to anyone who's not within the company. Anytime this is going out by email or the cloud, physically transferred by persons or talking about it to anyone outside the company, we're going to want to classify it. Also, before making it public, Placing it on the internet, again, a business decision. Probably don't want to do that anyway before it's classified, as you need to keep your trade secrets and your proprietary information confidential regardless. These are some triggers for when do we need to classify it. In order to upload, it needs to be marked, meaning you have to review it, review the export controls, and you have to classify it. If it has been reviewed but not marked yet, put a marking that says not reviewed yet, so that all company personnel know to classify it before sending it out. Have a marking procedure. Let's go on to controlled items. So we talked about ITAR and we'll talk to CCL coming up. The basic understanding is that something is controlled if it's on the list that the United States government says it's controlled. Those two lists, USML and CCL. You can figure out if they're on the list by these three different ways. Self-classification. We'll talk about this a little bit later today. Government determination. If you don't understand how the government defines some of their regulations, or if we think we have an idea of where it falls in regulations, but not quite sure, we can write to the US government and say, this is what we think it is, and can you confirm? The government will come down with the determination. Third is third-party classifications. If you're getting something from an outside company, they're going to do the proper classification. So if we're not sure if it's not the right classification or if we think it's wrong, always say something because we want to proceed with the most confidence on what classification we have. We can go to the government to get their determination. If it's a third-party classification, we suggest that you go to that O&M, OEM, and say there's no marking on here. I think that it should be so and so classification. Or if you think that it's wrong, just ask them their methodology of how they classified it so that you can be certain. So if you want to do self-classification, start with the agencies and the laws. This is nothing to you that you need to memorize. This is a little chart AEGIS put together on to keep it organized. On one side, we have the Department of State. On the other side, we have the Department of Commerce. These are the two main agencies that we're discussing. There's others like Department of Energy, but we don't have any clear relationship to them, so we'll focus on these two. Under the Department of State, they have DDTC, Directorate of Defense Trade Controls. The DDTC administers the ITAR. The ITAR are the regulations, international traffic in arms regulations. Then the ITAR says this is the list, the USML, of all the control things of the ITAR. So all those definitions and buzzwords go together on that one side of the page. Then on the other side, we have the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce has told us, hey, you're going to administer these regulations, which are EAR. Then the EAR says, what's on that list of controlled items? And that's the CCL. We hope this keeps it a little bit simpler for you. ITAR and USML, EAR, and CCL. There is a specific order for reviewing. It's a step-by-step process that the government says we have to go through to determine the classification. Again, this is assuming that we're self-classifying something. So we can't just say, oh, this is really simple. It's not super high technology. This can be EAR or it's going to be EAR 99. We have to actually go through the process. So, briefly, you do not need to know how to go through this. You don't have to memorize any of it. You're not going to have to classify on your own. The idea is that when we are ready to classify something, anyone who has knowledge, whether they're in sales, marketing, or engineering, we're going to work together in compliance department and we'll work on this together. I just want you to have an idea of the step-by-step process that we go through and what it looks like. So, starting with the USML, you can see that it's a pretty small bucket. The USML is not terribly long. There's different categories. There's 21 categories actually, and you're going to start with whatever category fits your description. For example, category 15 is spacecraft and related articles. You'll most likely start with this one. A lot of times it describes certain spacecraft with certain capabilities. So, for instance, you find tanks, you find spacecraft, you find satellites, and they're going to be more private controlled, more technical. For example, if we have a spacecraft with remote sensing capability, or they autonomously form collision, or they're classified, or maybe we have a ground control system or a training simulator. This includes spacecraft parts, components, and all the little things because we classify the end item, but also we classify all the parts and components as well if those are the ones to be exported. So the idea is to show how little things are classified in the USML, but still have to go through the steps. If we go through all the category 15 and our spacecraft is not described in it, then we move on to the EAR. You can see the CCL is a much larger bucket. It's much longer list and it captures more things. It also has different categories that are very different. Category 9 is aerospace and propulsion. So that's probably where we're going to start. Same idea as the ITAR. We read through the different paragraphs. We see if it describes the capabilities of what we're trying to classify. Then we go on from there. So this includes things like different satellites. Here's that picture that showed you before, the M1 satellite, as you can see in the top center. We've already classified. So we know that M1 satellite is 9A515. You don't have to know what that means. Basically, 9 is the category aerospace and propulsions. The letters and numbers after the 9 are different groupings. A is for software and E is for technology. The technology is 9E515. Any kind of CAD related software would be 9D515. Even if we have one item, we might have a couple different classifications depending on what exactly we're talking about. If we go through this CCL and we don't find anything that is describing exactly what we have, we're going to go to the EAR 99 bucket, which is much, much bigger. That's going to be everything from pencils to chairs, so everything that you're exporting will be classified at some level, even if it's EAR 99. You will end up with only one classification. That's why you go through the evaluation in this order, because we start with the more highly classified categories. If it's described, then we stop. You've captured the classification. If we end up in EAR 99, it's generally low technology, which might not require license in many situations. But we have to take note of who the end user is and why they require it. These next two slides, I don't even want to touch on them too much. I just want to have these when you have your actual PDF of this presentation so that you can see that there's different terminology in the USML and than there is in the CCL. For USML, they're talking about defense articles, which are hardware or technical data. They don't even have a separate technology for software. It all just goes under technical data. Then USML has different service items not covered on the EAR. So the CCL looks like this. We got commodities. That's our thing. Also, technology and then software. Assuming a satellite is EAR with an ITAR payload, you will keep it at the higher classification. This slide included for completion and your reference if or when applicable. All right, so let's talk about what is technical data and technology. We should talk about them together because the definitions are so similar. It is information necessary for all these things. So if you're looking at something and we want to determine if it's technology or not, this is the definition that we're going to use. Here are some examples of what is considered technology and things that are not technology. Things that we're going to use for marketing purposes. Things that we are going to use for sales purposes, like general descriptions of defense articles. Yes, I can fit with that generation of equipment. Yes, I can meet that specification. Yes, I have the regulatory approval. All those are not going to be considered technology, and we can be shared freely, whether at a trade show or on the phone with a customer. Things that are going to be technology go that how something is designed, manufactured, or tested. Here we're back at our M1 satellite photo. So the question is, and this is very subjective, clearly, does this have enough information in it to show you how it's designed, how it's manufactured, how it's assembled? We have decided that there is not enough of the how to make this picture considered technology. Let's go on and talk about licensing. When do we need an export license and how do we get one? Let's change a hypothetical to a facility tour. Let's say that we have a foreign person coming in and they're going to tour the facility, and we want to share engineering designs. We saw from the previous slides that engineering designs are most certainly controlled information. They're going to be considered technology. When we go to the EAR, this is just a snapshot of what this looks like online. Everything is very accessible. You can go to EAR, find the CCL, and do all of this on your own. You don't have to do it on your own, though. We'll be fully supportive when needed. AEGIS, when you need to help classify something. You can see at the top it's 9E515, and that's technology required for, that's the full explanation for 5E515. Then it tells you what the license requirements are. There's reason for control, and there's a bunch of additional acronyms. Then it tells you in this gray box specifically what reasons for control apply to what subparagraphs. So 9E515 is the general paragraph. Then we have different subparagraphs. We've decided that technology is 9E515, and you can see there the technology is required for. It's for all of ECCN's 9A 515, which what technology corresponds to. So commodity is the 9A 515 and technology is 9E 515. NS, RS, MT, those are all reasons for control that are in a separate regulation because it would be too much to put all into the CCL. And again, you don't have to memorize any of this. AEGIS is here to support in any way when needed. Here's another snapshot of a different regulation. This is called the Commerce Country Chart. So when we take those reasons for control, NS, RS, MT, and we look at this chart, Germany is used as an example. Let's say that we have a German foreign person coming to our facility and we want to share some technology with them. The EAR tells me under 9E515 that it's controlled for national security reasons in column 1, regional stability reasons also in column 1, and then there's no anti-terrorism reasons. I'm looking at these columns and I see an X in national stability and regional stability. The X tells me that I need a license for Germany. So we're going to have enough lead time to request from the government, a license for a certain person or a certain technology for a certain reason. That reasons for license go into other regulations. All right, so when we get to a possible exception, even though the ECCN tells you that there's a license requirement, there are exceptions under EAR and exemptions under ITAR. We're just looking at EAR now as it pertains to Proteus space. One of the most popular ones that you're able to use is strategic trade-off authorization, STA, but there are still exceptions from using your exception. One of those is because Commerce Country Chart says that there's national security reasons plus national stability reasons. We're not actually going to be able to use this trade authorization exemption. So it does come into play later if you want to use an exemption. This is just one example. Okay, we need a license. Is there an exemption? Let's look through and see what exemptions require and we can classify all those requirements. Keep good records when using exemptions. Talking about Proteus Space's compliance team, right now it's Terry and Bob. So if you have questions, that's where you go to. You start with Terry. Terry and Bob will be able to tell you whether a license is not required, whether we need an exemption, or if we need exemption or exception, or if we need to obtain the license. Again, you don't need to memorize any of this. It's really for issue spotting and being alert, knowing whether something is classified or not, knowing if something needs to be classified. If it needs to be or it's not, bring it to Terry's attention. AEGIS will work with Terry to classify. Controlled activities. I just want to go through this briefly. Proteus Space is already registered with DDTC for manufacturing defense articles. That's awesome. If you do end up providing defense services, I just want to give you the definition of what defense service looks like. That is giving assistance to foreign persons. If you're doing anything with or in partnership that is related to the design or the development of or engineering or assembly of things listed in the USML, we do need authorization beforehand. Just be aware for something pops like this pops up that we need authorization before we're engaging. The EAR also tells us that there's some activities we can't engage in. We want to briefly touch on these. One of the big ones that is often overlooked is foreign boycott related requests. If you're working with a foreign company and you're in the exporting department or marketing, sales, customer support, you may get this language in the whole number of documents like RFQs, commercial invoices, phone, email, sales contracts. If any language is about anti-boycott of a certain boycott that the United States does not support. So the biggest one is the boycott of Israeli goods. It's definitely in the forefront now. It's been the most widely used one before this recent war event of June 2025. If you see things in the contract that says no Israeli or origin goods, or goods must not be shipped on vessels or carriers on the Israeli boycott list, or questions that call out nationalities that work at Proteus Space, especially if it's Israeli nationalities, that is possibly a request for you to comply with the foreign boycott that the U.S. does not condone. You cannot engage with that foreign boycott or related request. Now, that isn't to say that you can't work with that company, but you do need to report these requests to the U.S. government, and you cannot participate in the boycott. So if you're able to remove that language from the contract that says no Israeli foreign goods, whether you're intent to supply Israeli goods or not, it's not the point. The point is having the language in the contract. If you remove that so that you're not complying with this foreign boycott, then you're able to do business with the government. Then you have a duty to report to the Department of Commerce, Anti-Boycott Compliance Department, Keep a record of the request, how you resolved it, and have that on hand in case it's needed in the future. Some other things that EAR does not want you to do: prohibited end users and end uses. We talked about on the CCL, there's a box that says whether we need a license or not for what paragraph and for what security reasons. Even if there's no license required for whatever country that we're going to export to, the EAR says, hold on, we're still going to restrict certain end users and certain end uses. By restrict, we mean that we need to apply for a license before we do this. So regardless of what your ECCN is or whether the CCL says you need to a license, if you know that your thing is going to be used in a nuclear weapon or for military use, then you need authorization from the US government. Or if it's going to be sent to a certain person on prohibited parties list. Okay, prohibited persons and countries. Let's talk about the consolidated screening list. There are programs that can do the search for you, or you can do it for free online. You're going to go to the link here on this page, put in the name of the person, put in the name of the company, turn on the fuzzy matching so that you get any kind of related hits if something is spelled wrong. Then you see what the Department of Commerce, State, Treasury come up with. All of their lists are on this search engine now. If you get a hit, meaning that if you find a name or an address that is the same as the party that you're screening, you need to do due diligence to make sure it's not a false positive, or if it is a positive hit, determine if you can actually do business with them. So if you then decide that it's actual false positive, that the person that they came up with is not what came up, actually, then just document that in the record log. If we cannot determine that it was a false positive, then stop your transaction. Stop any kind of transaction that you have engaged with this party. Review the regulations because the regulations are more specific as to what level of business can be done with this person or company, if at all. Who are we going to screen? Are we going to screen US and foreign persons? Yes, we screen everyone. This is your due diligence step so that the government ever says that we're not supposed to be doing business with this person or this company, you can have a print out to say that you went to this website and vetted them. We didn't find a hit, or here's how we resolved it. Everyone, foreign and domestic, should be screened. Some places that we cannot send our things to or engage with, like certain countries or nationals, you all know that there are embargoes and sanctions on countries. Some are totally comprehensive to not do business with or even let our things transit through, like Cuba, Iran, Syria. Then there's other sanctions where certain items that cannot go through certain destinations without asking for a license. For embargo and sanctioned countries, there's actually a presumption of denial. most likely will not get a license unless it's for humanitarian aid or something similar. Screen through this website. So now let's talk about red flags. This is a short list of things should be raising your awareness that something is going on here. I need to escalate this. You escalate it to Terry for your compliance manager. There is not a comprehensive list. This is not a comprehensive list. It's just things that have come up to be aware of. Run them through the screening process to evaluate whether we can do business with them. Proteus Space's due diligence process is outlined in the Trade Compliance Program. Let's talk briefly about travel and remote work. Travel and remote work safeguards must be in place. Here's some best practices here. We can drill down further in the TCP. Overall, you get permission before you travel. Make sure you're not going to a sanctioned company. If you're bringing any kind of device, make sure it's clean. Nothing is stored locally on the hard drive that would be export controlled or proprietary information or sensitive information that you wouldn't want to get outside the company. When you go through the border, there's a border search exemption. There's no presumption of any kind of security there. They can make you open your devices. They can take all your information. So make sure that nothing is saved locally when traveling. If you do need to access information while you're traveling, make sure that it's encrypted and not going through a cloud in certain countries. There's a whole list of countries that we can't do, like Russia, Korea. If you're accessing export controlled information, make sure that nobody is around you and that you are not on public Wi-Fi. Have everything locked up in a hotel safe if you're not on your person. All right, so visitor procedures. Everyone that you know is coming should be vetted ahead of time. Do your registration to know where they're coming from, what their nationality is, what they're there for, how long they're going to be there for, who they're associated with. Make sure they sign in and out. Everyone at Proteus Spaces wears a badge. Make sure that anyone you see has a badge. If you don't recognize them, make sure that they get a badge. Find out who they are first. Make sure that they do not see any export controlled information along the way. Anyone who is a foreign needs to prove it when they show up with a passport, license, or similar. If they can't prove that they are a U.S. person, then they are treated as a foreign person. That means they're not going to be given access to export controlled information as we're walking them around. Everyone must be escorted. It's good practice to announce to the building that a foreign person is going to be present so that you can wipe the whiteboards clean, close your laptops, cover things with a sheet, put up a screen, whatever you need to do to cover export controlled items. Record keeping, we mentioned a few times. There are just some of the things that you need to keep. Anything related to your exports, classifications, screening, factory tours. All of that needs to be kept. It doesn't need to be paper form. It can be electronic. Just make sure it's legible. If you're going from paper to electronic, make sure that it's exact replica of what you had in paper form. The idea is that the government needs to see anything. It's accessible and it's clear, and you can get it within a short amount of time. They will not be patient if they think there's been a violation. You'll keep everything for 5 years. All right. In terms of violations, the question is anything 100% possible to be compliant? And how do we avoid violations? The ITAR and EAR regulations give you ways that you can avoid violations. This includes our trade compliance program, this training, classification matrix registered with the DDC, screening everyone, know your end use and end user, maintaining records. These are all ways that we can avoid violations. We do all this to reduce our risk level when we're engaged in the regulations and trade. If we do believe that there's been a violation, call your compliance manager, Terry. He'll instruct us as to what to do, and we'll decide what to do moving forward with AEGIS. And that ends the annual training. Please get with Terry or Bob with any questions that you might have.